He fired her because she refused to take his money. That moment, right there in the middle of Luckie Street Tower's marble lobby, changed both of their lives forever. Keisha Brooks stood frozen, holding her mop handle like it was a shield. Her eyes burned, but her voice didn't shake. "You think everything can be fixed with a check," she said quietly, her words trembling in the cold air between them. "Before we go on, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, your country and your city. I'd love to see how far these stories travel. And hey, my landlord told me, if I don't get 100 subscribers before end of next week, I will be evicted. Kindly hit that subscribe button right now to save me from eviction." Alright, let's get back to the story. Robert Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technologies, billionaire at 38, looked like the kind of man who never heard no in his entire life. But that day, he did. He had just offered to cover her mother's hospital bill. Not as a gesture of pity, at least that's what he told himself, but because he'd overheard her on the phone earlier that morning. She was in the hallway outside the break room, whispering about selling her brother's old car to pay for dialysis. He wasn't supposed to hear it, but he did. And something in her tone, half hope, half surrender, had stuck with him. So, in typical Robert Sterling fashion, he tried to solve the problem. He pulled her aside after her shift, told her he'd take care of the bill, and even called his assistant to arrange it. But Keisha wouldn't accept it. She said she didn't need saving. She said it like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. He'd fired her in frustration, not because he wanted to, but because in that moment, her pride challenged everything he believed about control. But here's the thing about power, when someone finally stands up to it, it remembers. And Robert couldn't stop remembering her. That night, he sat in his penthouse overlooking Atlanta, trying to focus on numbers and quarterly projections. But all he saw was that janitor's face, the courage in her eyes when she told him no. He'd built an empire out of decisiveness. But for the first time in years, he was second-guessing a decision he'd made. So, 2 days later, he called HR, reinstate her, he said simply. With a raise. They told him she hadn't come back. She'd quit. Something about that hit him harder than he expected. Because people didn't quit Sterling Technologies. They either got promoted, or burned out trying. Keisha Brooks just walked away. He found himself driving to the hospital she'd mentioned, telling himself it was just to make sure her mom was okay. But deep down, it was something else. When he saw Keisha sitting outside the emergency wing, her head buried in her hands, he realized how small the world could suddenly feel when you cared about someone you weren't supposed to notice. He didn't say anything at first. Just sat beside her on the cold concrete bench, silence stretching between them. She finally looked up. "You shouldn't be here." He almost smiled. "You shouldn't be alone." It was the first time his voice didn't sound like an order. That night, he didn't offer her money again. Instead, he listened. About her brother working 2 jobs. About her mother's worsening condition. About how she cleaned floors in a building full of people who didn't see her. Something inside him shifted, like a door opening that he didn't know was there. And for the first time in his adult life, Robert Sterling wanted to fix something he couldn't buy his way out of. The next morning, Robert did something completely out of character. He showed up at the hospital, not as a CEO, not with a driver, not even in a suit. He wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt. And when Keisha saw him walking down that sterile hallway with 2 cups of coffee, she almost laughed. "You really don't know how to take a hint, do you?" she said. He shrugged. "I'm not great at giving up." It became their rhythm. He'd show up after work, sit with her in the hospital waiting area, and talk about everything but work. She told him about growing up on the south side of Atlanta, about how her dad taught her to fix cars before he passed. He told her about his mother, who used to scrub floors in a restaurant before he built his company. Little by little, the gap between billionaire and janitor started to shrink, not because their worlds changed, but because they stopped pretending they were so different. One night, as they sat watching the city lights flicker outside the hospital window, a nurse named Rita walked by and said, "You know, sometimes people from different worlds end up saving each other." Then she paused and added softly, "But only if they stop trying to figure out who's saving who." It sounded like a riddle, and Keisha couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was saving who? When her mom finally stabilized, Keisha went back to cleaning shifts. But something was different. Robert stopped by the building more often, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to talk. The janitors whispered. The board members noticed. And rumors started spreading like wildfire. People said the CEO was getting distracted. That he'd lost his edge. But they didn't know that the distraction was the only thing keeping him human. The moment that changed everything came a week later. Keisha was mopping the hallway outside his office late one night. He'd stayed behind to finish a deal, the kind of high-stakes acquisition that would make headlines. She didn't expect him to notice her. But when the elevator doors opened and he saw her reflection in the glass, he didn't move. "Keisha," he said quietly, like her name itself was an apology. She turned, leaning on the mop handle. "You know this doesn't look good, right?" He smiled faintly. "Most good things don't." She laughed, but her eyes softened. "You really are bad at boundaries." He took a step closer. "And you really are bad at pretending you don't care." That silence again, thick enough to feel. She looked away first. "Don't ruin your reputation for me." He exhaled. Maybe it's time it got ruined. That night, something broke between them, the invisible rule that said people like her shouldn't cross into worlds like his. And when he invited her to join him for a day on his yacht, she didn't say yes immediately. But she didn't say no either. Her heart said don't trust him. Her eyes said maybe you already do. Before she left that night, Rita, the nurse from the hospital, ran into her again in the lobby and said quietly, "Be careful, honey. Some men build walls to keep others out. Some build them hoping someone will climb over." Another riddle. And this one stayed with Keisha. Because she couldn't tell which kind of man Robert Sterling really was. The invitation came in a plain white envelope, slipped under her locker at work. No company letterhead. No signature. Just 3 words written in clean, confident handwriting. Saturday. Pier 17. She knew who it was from. All week, Keisha tried to convince herself not to go. Billionaires didn't invite janitors on yacht trips out of kindness. There was always something underneath it, an image to repair, a guilt to ease, or maybe just curiosity dressed as charity. But when Saturday came, she found herself standing at the marina, staring at a 50-foot yacht with the name Serenity glinting in silver across its side. Robert was already there, wearing a light linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, no watch, no tie, just a man stripped of his usual armor. "Didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "Didn't think I would either," she replied. He smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was almost nervous. They set out into the water, the city shrinking behind them. The hum of the yacht blended with the rush of the waves, and for the first time since she'd met him, Robert looked small, human. He showed her the controls, the view from the bow, even let her steer for a while. Keisha laughed for the first time in weeks. She didn't realize how much she'd missed the sound of her own joy. When they dropped anchor, he brought out lunch, nothing extravagant, just sandwiches and fruit. "I had the chef prepare something simple," he said. "Didn't want to scare you off with caviar." She rolled her eyes. "You mean you didn't want to look like a billionaire?" He grinned. "Maybe I wanted to look like someone you could actually talk to." There it was, the wall cracking again. But beneath all the laughter and easy conversation, Keisha felt something pulling tight inside her chest. Every time he looked at her, she saw 2 versions of him, the men who'd fired her without thinking, and the men who now seemed afraid to lose her. At one point, he asked quietly, "Do you ever think about what you want to do, beyond cleaning floors?" She hesitated. Every night. But dreams cost money. He leaned closer. Maybe they don't have to. Her jaw tightened. Don't do that. Do what? Turn my life into a charity project. I'm not your redemption arc. He looked away then, guilt flickering behind his eyes. That's not what I meant. Then what do you mean, Robert? She asked, her voice sharp. He opened his mouth to answer, but stopped. Whatever he was about to say, whatever truth he carried, died on his lips. That silence spoke louder than anything. Hours passed. The sun melted into the horizon, painting the water in gold. He poured her a glass of wine. She didn't drink it. Instead, she asked, "Why me? You could be with anyone." He exhaled. "Because you're the only person who's ever told me no." Keisha's eyes softened. "That's not love. That's fascination." "Maybe at first," he admitted. "But it's not anymore." The way he said it, quiet, certain, raw, made her chest tighten. He stood up then, walked to the edge of the deck, and turned back to her. "You know, my father used to tell me something," he said. He said, "A man can own everything and still be owned by what he fears to lose." He looked straight at her. "I think I finally understand what he meant." She froze. Because for the first time, she saw fear in him. Not the fear of failure or money or reputation, but the fear of feeling. That's when she realized something, maybe she was just as scared. Then came the first "wait, what" moment. Robert walked into the cabin below deck and came back holding a small black velvet box. Her heart nearly stopped. He opened it slowly, not a ring, not diamonds, but a simple silver necklace. Inside the lid was engraved one word, belonging. "I wanted to give you something that wasn't about money," he said. "Something that meant what I feel when I'm around you." She stared at the word. Belonging. For someone like Keisha, who'd spent her whole life on the outside looking in, it felt heavier than any jewel. But before she could answer, his phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, he glanced at the screen, then froze. His expression shifted. His jaw clenched. She saw the color drain from his face. "Everything okay?" she asked. He hesitated. It's from the board." "About what?" He didn't answer. Just muttered, "We should head back." The mood changed instantly. On the ride back, silence filled the air again. Keisha watched the lights of Atlanta grow larger, brighter, colder. Robert's hands tightened on the wheel. When they docked, he didn't meet her eyes. "Robert," she said softly, "what's going on?" He swallowed. "They found out about us." Her stomach dropped. "They think you're a distraction," he continued. "That I've lost focus. That I'm risking the company's image." She laughed bitterly. "So they're mad that you're human." "It's not that simple," he said. "It never is for people like you." He flinched. Then she took off the necklace and placed it gently in his hand. "I told you not to make me part of your world. Because your world doesn't let people like me stay." She turned to leave. But before she could step off the dock, he grabbed her wrist, not rough, just desperate. "Keisha, please. Don't walk away." She looked back, eyes wet. "You said you understood belonging. Then tell me, Robert, do you belong to them, or do you belong to yourself?" That question, sharp as glass, hit him harder than any boardroom confrontation ever could. And just like that, she was gone. Days passed. Then a week. Robert buried himself in work. Meetings. Stockholder calls. Public statements. All the things that made him feel powerful and hollow. He told himself he'd done the right thing by letting her go. Protecting her from the fallout. But every night, he'd end up on the balcony, staring out at the skyline, thinking about the woman who'd made him question the meaning of wealth itself. And that's when the second riddle returned to him, Rita's voice in his head. Some men build walls to keep others out. Some build them hoping someone will climb over. He realized, maybe for the first time, that he'd spent his whole life building the wrong kind of wall. A month later, Keisha got a letter in the mail. No name on the envelope. No return address. Just a single folded note inside. It read, "The board forced me to choose. I chose you. I just don't know if you'll still want me when you find out what I've lost." Attached was a newspaper clipping, Sterling Technologies CEO steps down. She stared at it for a long time, heart racing. Then she whispered to herself, "Wait, what did you do, Robert?" When Keisha found that letter, she sat on the edge of her bed for what felt like hours, the newspaper clipping shaking in her hands. He stepped down. Robert Sterling, the man whose name was on every elevator door, every press article, every whispered conversation in that building, had walked away from it all. For her. Her first reaction wasn't joy. It was disbelief. Then anger. Then something she couldn't quite name, the kind of emotion that starts in your chest and spreads before you can stop it. She didn't want to be someone's reason for falling apart. She wanted to be the reason they built something new. That night, she went back to the hospital. Her mother was finally home, recovering. The nurse, Rita, the woman with the riddles, was finishing her shift. "You look like someone who just found out love isn't as simple as it sounds," Rita said gently, pulling off her gloves. Keisha managed a weak smile. "You and your riddles, huh?" Rita shrugged. "Want to hear the last one?" Keisha sighed. "Might as well." Rita leaned closer and said softly, "The richest heart isn't the one that gives the most, it's the one that learns when to keep nothing back." Keisha frowned. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Rita smiled. "Maybe it means what you think it means." Then she walked away, leaving Keisha standing in the hallway, the words echoing in her mind. Keep nothing back. By sunrise, she knew exactly what she had to do. 3 days later, Keisha made her way back to the marina, the same pier where she'd stood in that plain dress, afraid of being seen. But this time, she wasn't afraid. The yacht was still there, anchored quietly, as if waiting. She walked down the dock, her footsteps soft against the wood. When she reached the deck, she found Robert sitting alone, looking out over the water. He didn't hear her at first. He looked tired, older, not in years, but in weight. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said finally, without turning. "You gave me no choice," she replied. "You sent me a newspaper clipping instead of an explanation." He turned then, his eyes meeting hers. "What would you have said if I'd called?" "I would have said you're an idiot." He smiled, faintly, but real. "Yeah. I figured that." She stepped closer. "You gave up everything. Why?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I couldn't stand walking into the building every morning and pretending it mattered more than you." Silence hung heavy. The kind that stretches between two people when everything's been said but nothing's been felt yet. Finally, he stood. "I didn't ask you here to explain," he said. "I asked you here to show you something." He gestured toward the cabin door. She hesitated, then followed him inside. The space had changed. The sleek glass and chrome surfaces were gone, replaced with sketches, plans, photos. At the center of the table sat a folder labeled, Brooks Community Foundation. Keisha opened it. Inside were blueprints for a series of small community centers, job training programs, healthcare access initiatives, free daycare spaces. Each one stamped with the name Sterling Brooks Initiative. She looked up, confused. "You did this?" He nodded. "We did this. Well, I started it. But I can't run it alone. It's not supposed to be a company. It's supposed to be a purpose. Her throat tightened. Robert, I don't know anything about running a foundation. He smiled. You know everything about people who need one. It hit her then, the meaning of Rita's last riddle. The richest heart isn't the one that gives the most, it's the one that keeps nothing back. He'd given up everything except this. And now he was giving her the chance to build something that wasn't about charity or power, but about belonging. He reached into his pocket, and for a moment she thought it was the necklace again. But when he opened his hand, there was a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. This time, it was a ring. Simple. Elegant. A single stone that caught the light like a promise. He took a slow breath. I didn't plan this to be a fairy tale, Keisha. I don't have a company anymore. No empire. Just this boat, and a woman I can't stop thinking about. He dropped to one knee, right there on the yacht deck. I don't want you to be part of my world, he said softly. I want to build a new one with you. Keisha covered her mouth, tears forming before she could stop them. She whispered, You really are terrible at boundaries. He laughed. So, is that a yes? She didn't answer right away. She looked out at the water, the same horizon that once made her feel small, and then back at him, the men who'd traded power for peace. Finally, she said, It's a yes. But only if we do this as equals. He nodded. That's the only way I want it. And as he slid the ring onto her finger, the first light of dawn spilled across the deck, turning the water gold. They never went back to the way things were. Sterling Technologies moved on without him, and Keisha left her janitor's badge behind for good. Together, they launched the foundation, small at first, then growing faster than either of them expected. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, stress, fear. But there was also something they'd both been missing their whole lives, peace. One afternoon, a year later, Keisha stood in front of a group of young women at one of the centers. She was telling her story, not about falling for a billionaire, but about believing in her own worth before anyone else did. And from the back of the room, Robert watched her, quiet, proud, content. Afterward, as they walked out into the Atlanta sunset, she asked him softly, Do you ever miss it? The money? The power? He smiled. Sometimes. But then I remember what Rita said. Keisha grinned. Which part? He looked at her, eyes full of warmth. That some men build walls hoping someone will climb over. And I'm glad why. She laughed, leaned her head against his shoulder, and whispered, You know, you still owe me another yacht trip. He smirked. Then it's a date. And that was the story, not of a billionaire saving a janitor, but of two people saving each other from the loneliness of their own worlds. A story about pride, belonging, and the kind of love that doesn't need wealth to be rich. Before you go, if this story touched you even a little, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but for you. Because stories like this remind us of something most of us forget, that love, no matter where it starts, is the one thing money can't buy, and the one thing worth staying for. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, your country and your city. And remember, sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who learn how to love.